The 2020 adaptation of Rebecca is not good. If you completely forget about the original source material, then maybe you could say it's an enjoyable film, a nice way to pass the time for 2 hours. However, as a book-to-film adaptation, it majorly fails. Before I say anything else, I want to warn you that there are going to be spoilers for both the 1938 novel and the 2020 film in this video. The novel Rebecca is a romantic suspense story that follows a young woman who is never named while she's on a trip in Monte Carlo. The main character works as a companion for an older, richer woman, and while she's on this trip, she meets an older gentleman named Maxim De Winter, who has recently been widowed. And over the course of a week or two, they fall in love and they decide to get married. The main character follows Maxim to his home of Manderley, which is a very famous and prominent estate. And the house is very much haunted by the memory of Maxim's first wife, Rebecca. The heroine is constantly reminded all the time of Rebecca, by the staff, by people who knew her, by Maxim's family. Rebecca supposedly drowned in an accident out at sea, but you as the reader are constantly questioning whether this is actually what happened to her. This novel is categorized as a romantic suspense book, but I think you can tell from the synopsis that I just gave you that it tends to lean more towards suspense and mystery than romance. And the problem with the 2020 film is that it did the exact opposite. It leaned far too much into the romance and virtually forgot about the suspense of the movie. Maxim and the heroine's relationship is not really defined by any physical attraction. I don't believe it is ever mentioned that they even kiss one another in the book. And yet in the 2020 film, the time that those two spend in Monte Carlo is fueled by passion and attraction. I mean, they sleep with each other for the first time on the beach, for God's sake. And I believe this change was made, one, to invest us in the relationship, and two, because of the difference in ages from the book to the film. In the book, Maxim and the heroine are about 20 years apart in age. She's 21 and he is in his early 40s. Thus, it is not so much physical attraction that brings the two together, but rather companionship and mutual care and understanding. Whereas in this film, you have Armie Hammer and Lily James, who are both pretty close in age. In the books, Maxim and the heroine are always taking these very long drives and just sitting in companionable silence, whereas in the film, Maxim and the heroine are going on these very flirty, adventurous excursions. When you make these really big changes to the foundation of this main romantic relationship, that's going to cause a lot of issues later on in the story. Throughout their time at Manderley and even in Monte Carlo, Maxim is very easygoing, for lack of a better word. Yes, there are moments where he seems withdrawn and cold and perhaps a bit curt with his wife. Whereas in the film, Maxim seems to be on edge the moment that they step foot in Manderley, and he's constantly taking his frustration and anger out on the heroine. In fact, I believe most of their scenes when they're at Manderley are ones of anger, fighting, and frustration. And if the film is choosing to lean more into the romance, this really damages their story, because all I'm seeing from Maxim is a temper. I'm not seeing him be loving and affectionate with his wife, and it just kind of makes you wonder why she's sticking around and putting up with this. Now, the one time that Maxim does display intense anger that seems to come out of nowhere is at the masquerade ball. Throughout the novel, people are constantly mentioning this very popular masquerade ball that apparently Rebecca used to hold, and in an attempt to please people, the heroine decides to revive this tradition. She keeps her costume a surprise until the night of the ball, and when she comes down the stairs wearing her costume, everyone freezes. Maxim yells at her in front of everyone to go upstairs and change. Obviously, the heroine is mortified, and she doesn't come down from her room for a majority of the night, and when she finally does, she doesn't really interact with Maxim, and he avoids her pretty much the whole night. In the film, this penultimate moment had absolutely no substance and none of the suspense and anxiety that it had in the book. Yes, Maxim yells at her and it's embarrassing, but that doesn't really feel like a huge shock because up until this point, Maxim has always been yelling at her. When he does it in the book, it is so out of character for him that it comes as a huge shock to both the reader and the main character. In the film, it kind of just seemed like any other night at Manderley. And another major change that they made to this scene is that they had the heroine go downstairs immediately after she was embarrassed in this way. Part of the delicious tension of that scene is that she is hauled up there, upstairs. She had all these grand plans of how she was going to make an entrance and make a huge, amazing impression on all of these people who she believes don't like her. And now she's stuck upstairs, and the longer she stays up there, the more embarrassing it gets. But in the film, all of that tension is completely lost when she goes downstairs. And they made another very bizarre and strange decision with this scene, which is that once the heroine is downstairs, she starts to experience these really weird and scary phenomenons while she's at the party. Everyone starts to surround her and yell at her, "Rebecca, Rebecca, Rebecca." And she believes that she is seeing a woman in a red dress who is meant to be Rebecca, and she starts chasing her around the house. Now, I understand the purpose of this scene. You wanted to show how overwhelmed the heroine was, and how Rebecca was starting to take over her life. For me, it just felt so corny and forced. I felt like I was watching something out of Moulin Rouge. The amazing thing about the source material is that the tension, it's almost quiet, and it creeps up on you. I don't know about you guys, but I much prefer that simmering, slow kind of tension to the bombastic displays that we got in the film. Another thing that was very disappointing was just the heroine herself. I don't know what happened, because I know for a fact that Lily James is a very talented actress, and yet in this film, I felt nothing from her. So many of her reactions felt wildly over the top. For example, when the psychological pressure and torture is becoming too much and Mrs. Danvers is pushing her to commit suicide, she falls onto the floor and is writhing there in this very uncomfortable and strange reaction. Now, I mentioned Mrs. Danvers, and let's go ahead and talk about her. She is virtually non-existent in this film. How are you going to have an actress like Kristen Scott Thomas and completely underutilize her? From the very start, you can feel a kind of animosity from her. She does not like the heroine at all. She is 110% devoted to Rebecca, even after Rebecca has passed. In fact, she's probably more so devoted to Rebecca in death than she ever was to her in life. She is constantly undermining the heroine and letting her know that she does not belong there in any small way that she can. Now, in the movie, you get the sense that Mrs. Danvers doesn't like her, but it's never that obvious animosity that we get in the book. And by the time her true intentions and hatred is revealed, it just falls flat in the film. I know that I said that the movie is 2 hours, but it does not cover nearly half the novel. So many vital plot points and emotional beats throughout the story are often combined into one scene. And that means that we never actually get a chance to sit and revel in the suspense and tension of those moments. And like I mentioned, so many characters barely get any screen time. I've mentioned Mrs. Danvers. I should also mention Beatrice. She's Maxim's sister, and she becomes a very close friend and confidant to the heroine. And yet in the movie, she shows up maybe twice, and that's it. And so many of these scenes and moments could have been included. You could have expanded on Beatrice and the heroine's friendship. You could have shown the true nature of Mrs. Danvers far earlier than before. But instead, they decided to throw in these random scenes of Maxim sleepwalking. Why? I literally could not tell you if I wanted to. So now let's talk about the ending, and by that I mean like the last 40 minutes of the film. Basically, they changed everything, and not for the better. In an attempt to make the ending more suspenseful and more dramatic, they decided to have Maxim go on trial and be put in prison. And then you have the heroine taking a very active role in trying to discover some dirt on Rebecca to make sure that Maxim can go free. And in this attempt to make things more suspenseful, they actually sucked away all the tension and mystery. In the book, Maxim never really goes to trial. Instead, you have confrontations with Favel, who wants to figure out the truth, and they eventually get the magistrate involved, and then the whole group of people, Favel, the magistrate, Maxim, and the heroine, they all go together to the doctor to figure out what Rebecca was doing the day that she died. But instead, in the film, it's this very dramatic chase scene in which the heroine is trying to get to the information at the doctor's office before the prosecutor and the doctor can get there. And this is the juiciest moment of the novel. This is the climax. This is when we finally figure out what Rebecca was doing, what she was up to that day. Now, some people may argue that a trial is way more tense and suspenseful than just a group of people going to a doctor's office. But like I said, this book is not bombastic. It is a slow, simmering burn. There's tension in the fact that all these people are going there, and you know that any second, some information could be revealed that could indict Maxim. Yes, the magistrate seems very friendly, but you know that in a second, he could change his entire demeanor. And you have Favel there, who is out to get Maxim, who is determined to twist every fact and information that they find against Maxim. And the entire time, the heroine is remaining passive and quiet, but in her mind, you can see just how tense and anxious she feels. In the film, we're obviously not in her head, so we can't experience her anxiety in the same way, so they have to give her something active to do. But then, when the revelation finally comes that Rebecca has cancer, it's just thrown out there in the movie, Like, it's nothing. The heroine just says she has cancer, the prosecutor is like, oh, okay, well, I guess the trial's over. And then not even a minute later, Maxim is free from prison, and they're hugging and kissing, and they're happy. I was really just in shock when I watched that, honestly. There was absolutely no suspense, no drama, no thrills, just nothing. I felt nothing. We covered the ending, so now let's talk about the actual, ending. Now, in the book, because we read the first 2 chapters, we know that Manderley no longer exists. And it's a question in our minds the whole time that what happened to Manderley? This is supposedly a happy ending. Maxim got away with murder, him and the heroine could go back to Manderley and live their lives together, but then, oops! Manderley's been burned down. But of course, in the movie, they're such fans of changing things that of course they have to change this too. In the book, it is very much implied that Mrs. Danvers burned down the house, but you never know that for sure. Whereas in the movie, you actually see Mrs. Danvers light the match. And then, to top it all off, you have the heroine running after Mrs. Danvers, who then commits suicide. And before she commits suicide, she turns to the heroine and says that you can never have Manderley, because it was ours. Mine and Rebecca's. I'm sorry, do you think that I'm stupid? Do I look stupid? And this is just such a huge difference between the book and the film. The book respects the reader. It knows that you can probably put 2 and 2 together and figure out that Mrs. Danvers burned the house because she believed that it could only belong to Rebecca. She says as much throughout the entire book. But of course, the movie had to just spoon feed us this information. The movie doesn't respect me or give me the benefit of the doubt that maybe I can piece 2 and 2 together with some context. Like, maybe I'm capable of doing that. Just a thought. In the very last scene of the movie, we see Maxim and the heroine together in Cairo. They're trying to find a permanent place to live, and in the final moments, they're making out, they're about to get down to it, and then the heroine looks straight down the barrel of the camera and the movie ends. What am I supposed to do with that? What does that mean? Why did you do that? This movie made so many changes that just absolutely destroyed the entire narrative. They cut down the screen time of virtually every major character. They completely butchered the characterization of Maxim. And worst of all, the movie had absolutely none of the suspense, tension, and mystery that the original source material had in abundance. If you were going to make any changes, the very least you could do is give Rebecca the respect that she deserves. I don't know about you guys, but even when I originally read the novel, I wasn't a huge fan of the plotline, guy's wife cheats on her all the time, so he kills her because he can't have that happening. The only perspective that we get on Rebecca is from Maxim and Mrs. Danvers, who both have very warped ideas of who she was as a person. So you know what? Let Rebecca speak, is what I have to say. Give her a spin-off. Change it so Rebecca gets this Gone Girl type of story, where the heroine gets to exact the revenge on Maxim that Rebecca never got to exact in her own lifetime. I don't know about you guys, but if they were going to make a change, I wouldn't have minded that one. On the whole, this movie was incredibly disappointing, which is sad, because they had a really great cast and there was so much potential, and yet none of it was realized. So that's it for me today, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know if you've watched the 2020 Rebecca film and what your thoughts are on it, whether you agree with me and don't think it was very good at all, or if you think that there are some redeeming qualities about it. As always, you can find my social media links in the description below, so go ahead and check those out if you would like, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!